JavaScript section. We're in global scope and functions. In JavaScript, scope refers to the visibility of variables. Variables, which are defined outside of a function block, have global scope. This means they can be seen everywhere in your JavaScript code. Variables, which are used without the var keyword, are automatically created in the global scope. This can create unintended consequences elsewhere in your code or when running a function again. You should always declare your variables with var. Using var, declare a global variable, myGlobal, outside of any function. Initialize it with a value of 10. Inside function fun1, assign 5 to oops global without using the var keyword. First, we're going to, using var, declare myGlobal initialized to the value 10, and that completes this. But then inside of function fun1, which is here, we're going to want to assign 5 to oops global without using the var keyword. So we would do oops global is assigned 5. So now we could run this. We did pass that. We go next, local scope and functions. Variables which are declared within a function, as well as the function parameters, have local scope. That means they are only visible within that function. Here's a function, myTest, with a local variable called loc. Function myTest has this variable loc, and it's assigned foo. And then we console log loc. MyTest is invoked, and it's going to log foo because we console log loc. But when we're outside of our function here, and we try to console log loc, loc is not defined. And that's because it only exists within this scope. Loc is not defined outside of the function. Declare a local variable, myVar, inside of my local scope. So where's my local scope? It's here. And they're saying declare a local variable, myVar, run the test, and then follow the instructions commented out in the editor. So if I run the test first, myVar is not defined. Run and check the console. MyVar is not defined outside of my local scope. So right here, we're trying to console log it, but it only exists within here. Also, we're not giving myVar any value, so when we're console logging myVar, it's not really consoling anything. But it says here, now remove the console log line to pass the test. This console log. Now, it's not giving us no errors, and that's because when we do call myVar, it's within the function, so it does exist. Even though it doesn't have a value, it does know that it exists and is not going to give us that error. So we can run tests now, and we should pass. We did. Global versus local scope and functions. It is possible to have both local and global variables with the same name. When you do this, the local variable takes precedence over the global variable. In this example, var sum var is assigned hat. Then we have this function myFun, which declares a variable also called sumVar and assigns to it head. Then we return sumVar. The function myFun will return head because the local version of the variable is present. The local version is here within this function. Add a local variable to myOutfit function to override the value of outerwear with sweater. So here we have outerwear and it's t-shirt, but they're saying inside of here do var outerwear is assigned sweater, and then it returns outerwear, which should return the local assignment. Run test. We did pass, and I should have maybe console logged it so you guys can see. And that could be done console log outerwear. We do see sweater console logged out. So let's run test, passed. Next one says return a value from a function with return. We can pass values into a function with arguments. You can use a return statement to send a value back out of a function. Example, function +3 takes in a num and it returns num +3. We have this variable answer, and it's assigned the result of invoking our +3 function with 5 as the number that's passed in as an argument. So +3 takes an argument for num and returns a value equal to num +3. Create a function times 5 that accepts one argument, multiplies it by 5, and returns the new value. See the last line in the editor for an example of how you can test your times 5 function. So, very similar to this here. So we're changing code below this line, and we're creating a function called times 5 that's going to accept an argument, arg1, and then within our function, when it does run, we want it to return, so we return arg1 times 5. So no matter what number is passed in as arg1, it's going to take that number and multiply it by 5 and return it. We could also console log it as they did and invoke our function times 5 and pass in a number like 2, and we do get 10. We could change this to 20 and we get 100. So now we can reuse our function whenever we want just by calling times 5 and then passing in an argument. Let's run test. We did pass. Understanding undefined value returned from a function. A function can include the return statement, but it does not have to. In the case that the function doesn't have a return statement, when you call it, the function processes the inner code, but the returned value is undefined. Example, we have this variable called sum, and it's assigned 0. We have this function, add sum, which takes in a num. We then assign to our original sum variable here, sum plus num, which would take our 0 and add to it whatever num was passed in here, and then updates our sum. Every time we call this function add sum and pass in a number, it should update the sum variable. Sum will be modified, but returned value is undefined. And why is that? Because we don't have a return value. Add sum is a function without a return statement. The function will change the global sum variable, but the return value of the function is undefined. Create a function, add 5 without any arguments. This function adds 5 to the sum variable, but its returned value is undefined. Here, we're creating a function called add 5. It doesn't take any arguments. And all we wanted to do is add 5 to our sum variable. So sum is assigned sum plus 5. Notice there is no return value here. So this function doesn't even return anything, but it does update this global variable called sum. So now we can run this test, and we did pass. Let's click next. Assignment with a return value. If you'll recall from our discussion of storing values with the assignment operator, everything to the right of the equals sign is resolved before the value is assigned. This means we can take the return value of a function and assign it to a variable. Assume we have predefined a function sum which adds two numbers together. Then our sum is assigned sum, 5 and 12 passed in. So this will call some function which returns a value of 17 and assigns it to our sum variable. Call the process arg function with an argument of 7 and assign its return value to the variable process. So the process arg function is here, process arg. They want us to call it here with an argument of 7, and they want us to assign its return value to the variable process, which is defined already here. So down here, we don't have to use the var keyword. We would just say processed is assigned process arg with 7 passed in, which would be the return value 7 plus 3 and then divided by 5. And we did pass. So we've pretty much covered a bunch of stuff, and I'll probably end it here. That way you guys can look over this again, go back and maybe redo some lessons that you're having trouble with understanding. Make sure to share, like, and subscribe if you find these videos helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.